process. And we used examples, right? We used examples from how you start. You start with the district court. So the district court, I feel like this is off some way for some reason on mine, but the district court, starting there. What type of cases are going to be tried in a district court? Sydney? What type of cases? There are only two to pick from, and not civil criminal. What's the other classification we went through yesterday? State or... So which one is going to start here? No. Only federal stuff. This is the federal stuff. It'll start here. And you look at how many they hear. Now, this is where I was trying to get you to understand that the justices that are on the Supreme Court get all the attention from Trump nominations. It is so much more about these positions. There are 94 U.S. districts across the country. All of them have a panel of judges, and then they select 3 to be assigned to different cases. That is a whole lot of positions. A lot of the strong precedents are just set in districts. This is the beginning. They hear the case, and they deal with lawyers on both sides. They deal with a jury on both sides, and they introduce evidence. And this would be, when you watch a movie, most of the time you're going to watch a movie that deals with a trial that is on a state level. This is the exact same. It just is dealing with federal crimes. Okay, there's not really much of a difference. So you can kind of think of it like that. They have original jurisdiction, which means it starts there. It starts here and it doesn't go anywhere until they make the ruling. And they will find somebody guilty or not guilty. Or they'll say you owe him money. Or they'll say you don't owe them money. They make a ruling and decide the outcome. The next step is the appellate jurisdiction. So it starts at original. That is the district. That's the one that would be in Detroit or maybe Flint. They've got an offshoot there. If you don't like the ruling, you would go here. So the district case that I brought up yesterday was gay marriage. Started in Detroit. They made a ruling, said that gay marriage bans in Michigan were unconstitutional. Snyder didn't like the ruling, so he appealed it. Now, when you appeal things, you only get to appeal a case if you don't like the ruling. So that is called an error of law, a procedure of law. And not just because they found you guilty. So hold on a second, error of law. It's not just because they found you guilty and you don't want to be found guilty. It's because they found you guilty by obtaining evidence illegally or by not giving you a lawyer. Or maybe the judge pointed out that you didn't testify, so you're obviously guilty. Those are errors of law, errors of the procedure of law, and that means that they can listen to an appeal. For the civil cases, like the gay marriage ones, those are where they would try to argue, look, they applied this piece of the Constitution so wrongly that you need to listen to it again. And there is a big, big difference between original and appellate. In original jurisdiction, and these are, again, the cases that you would hear or see on TV, you're going to have a lawyer on both sides, you're going to have testimony, you're going to have witnesses, you're going to have a jury. At this place, there is none of that. There are the original lawyers on one side, the original lawyers on the other, and then here's the previous case. Did they do it right the first time? Aaliyah, please stop. Did they do it right the first time? And if they did, they'll just say, yeah, they did everything they were supposed to do. If they think they were wrong, they'll say, no, they made the wrong ruling the first time. They have to change it. And this is where they have the priority. The higher up you go, the more precedent they say. So in the case of gay marriage, when it went up to the circuit, which is in, do you remember what city I said that one was in for us? No? Cincinnati. It's in Cincinnati. When it made it to Cincinnati, they ruled that our gay marriage ban was constitutional. So in the process, they took a ruling here said that it was wrong, or sorry, that the bans were unconstitutional. Same constitution, same case. Right here, they said that all of the blues could have gay marriage bans. But in the meantime, we had the orange out here who had said gay marriage bans were not okay for the oranges. So then you have two different colors that have two different precedents. Same levels, two different precedents. And when that happens, it's very likely to continue on. And when it continues on, what's the last step? The Supreme Court. That's the final destination, and that's the Supreme Court. Now, most of the time with the Supreme Court, almost always, in fact, and you will kind of come back to it, they are appellate jurisdiction, meaning they don't start the case. They hear the appeals. And that is where they go through that different colored system all the way up to the top. Most of the time, they're going to hear the appeals. Sometimes it's original, meaning it can start there, but that is very, very rare. Now, how many cases did that last district, or did the district, step one, how many cases do they hear every year? How many? 342,000. How many are heard right here? 72. There's a little bit of a drop off. So, why do they hear so few of cases? They don't get that far. And the Supreme Court is rather limited in a lot of ways. Number one, they don't get to just say, I want to make a ruling on gay marriage. They don't get to do that. It has to start somewhere else first. So in the case of Michigan, then Ohio and Kentucky also had the same thing. Then up to Cincinnati. Then somebody at Cincinnati has to not like that ruling. And they have to appeal to the Supreme Court and say, could you please listen to this case? We think they screwed up with their ruling. We think they applied the Constitution in the wrong way. There is an error of law. So please listen to it. And if 4 justices, so I mean, it kind of works like this. They get a meeting. They sit around a table and they say, okay, we've got a month. We've got to schedule the docket for 3 months. We have 150 appeals to work through. So here we go. Here's the first one. This case is about gay marriage. This district had said it was gay marriage bans were constitutional. This district said they weren't. Then it went to the circuits. This one said that it was okay. This one said it wasn't. I feel like we should, and this is the Chief Justice right now. He gets to lead these meetings. He'll say, I feel like this is something that we should address. Let's vote on it, see if it's a case worth hearing. And what they'll do is they'll vote. If there are 4 justices who agree that it's something they should bring up, then they'll bring it up. And what that means is they order this, a writ of certiorari. And this is there's a lot of Latin stuff when it comes to legal things. A writ of certiorari means I am telling your court that you have to send me the case. They don't get to start it. It's I am sending this letter. I am telling you. I'm telling the district. So Cincinnati, send me everything you have on your case, or send me everything you have on your case, because it is worth listening to. Now there are 8 right now, 9 very soon. Justices. They don't have to be on the same side of it. It has nothing to do with their opinion about the constitutionality. Did you like that? The constitutionality of the issue. It has to deal with whether or not it's worth listening to. So you could be on completely different sides and think, this is a case that we need to figure out a strong precedent for the entire country. Then they order it up, and they have to send it up to them, and then boom, they get to make a ruling that the precedent has to be followed by the entire country. Noah?
I was gonna make a stupid comment about you basically sitting out Ohio and Kentucky with the same thing. Like, it wasn't worth it.
Good decision.
Ohio
Good.
is objectively superior to the other
Ohio?
Ohio.
Yeah, without bias.
Yeah, we Have you ever had Cincinnati chili? It's great. We have.
Stop saying we and move on. We're not listening to you right now. There is no Ohio in this room. What?
Why wouldn't they take a case?
When would they choose to take a case? The best example is right there. The best example is there is a conflict with two states. Two circuits where two different colors don't go. Another situation is very topical of the times. So think back to civil liberties. During one individual justice's time, Chief Justice, with Warren, what did he do? It was Gideon, Matt versus Ohio, Escobedo, dealing with legal cases, so civil liberties. And it kind of depends on what is presented to them. Now, when would they not? They leave it up sometimes to the legislators to say, just go make the decision yourself. Because there's nothing really that says you can or can't do it. Leave it up to you. And that's where gay marriage stood for a long time. They called it a political question. It's a way for them to avoid addressing the issue. And that's usually how it ends up happening. But then, beyond that, there are just too many cases to listen to. Noah? Just say it.
In Texas, they're currently challenging in the courts, just like the unconstitutionality in their in general. Texas, specifically, state employees in Texas are married gay state employees in Texas are getting the same benefits as like heterosexual married people.
Sure.
And, comments on challenging that because they're like, they, the state has to recognize gay marriages, so they don't have to, give them the same rights.
I feel like that is a U.S. versus Windsor issue where, the benefits would also apply. But I don't know. That is interesting. And that's a state level, which, eventually could go up to the... But to this now, the original jurisdiction. Keep this somewhere. Cement this in your head. Very seldom do they have original jurisdiction. Sometimes they do, and there's a graphic coming up. But most of the time it's appellate, which means they have to decide, did the district get it right, and then did the circuit get it right? That is most of their cases. Most of the time it's going to be appellate, where somebody else had tried it first, a district, I'm saying, a circuit decided on the appeal, and then they have to decide on the final appeal. Or, actually, I should also say, if a state issue has to be decided, it had to be appealed. So Matt versus Ohio, that was a state Supreme Court ruling, right? It was versus Ohio. Then it got brought up even higher to the Supreme Court. So the stop point is always the same, way up top. Now, just finally with more senatorial courtesy, the impact of the president on the courts. There is a very long impact of a president's picks on the court, because how long do all federal judges serve? For life, until they retire, as long as it is good behavior, meaning what can still happen to them? They can still be impeached. And there have been federal judges who have been removed from impeachment. It's like a 1800s thing. But what I'll say is it's more common for them to be impeached and tried for corruption than anybody else. But back to senatorial courtesy. If Trump nominates somebody from Wyoming, and the Wyoming senator, who is a Republican, doesn't like them, what is that like? What was it? 70% Republican, I think, was the vote. I think it was like 70% for Trump though. Announce it. And they say we are not going to support them. The rest of the Senate will say, okay, they're not going to be the district court judge then. That's senatorial courtesy, which means the president essentially has to go to those state senators and say, who do you want us to pick? Now, if it's Trump coming to Michigan, is Trump going to go talk to the Democratic senators and say, who do you want to be the nominee? No, it's going to be the party still, but you kind of have that situation. Now, let's say that, and this is still true, even though Trump has the Senate right now. If he really wants to get his nominee to go through, what does he have to do? Any nominee, justice or otherwise. Bribe? Probably not going to work. I mean, if he wants to make sure his court nominees go through, what does he have to go do? Who does he have to go talk to, I guess? The senators. Go talk to the senators and say, what exactly do you need in a justice for it to be confirmed? Because I really want this. I know, for Obama, I know I'm a Democrat. I know Republicans, you control it. I'm not going to give you a full-on conservative justice. But what do I need? How far can I go to get you one, to get you to appoint him? And that relationship is pretty important because it is a long-lasting tenure. Yeah, Brennan.
If the justices are supposed to look at things like this actively just based on the Constitution, why does it matter so much what party they're in?
It matters because of how they interpret the Constitution, which is the last little bit that we close with today. But their interpretation of the Constitution often falls with how involved the government should be. Like, what is your idea of how big government should be? It sometimes aligns with your interpretation of the Constitution. Now, what committee did I say yesterday? What Senate committee first reviews after the Attorney General and the Department of Justice help the president get their nominees? Who is going to first interview and hold a hearing for the nominee? The Judiciary Committee. Why? Because they deal with judiciary issues. So very quickly, they're going to have a serious meeting with the Supreme Court nominee. They're going to have a very serious meeting going through it. And a lot of them don't get through. Why is it that a federal judge will not get through? And I'm not talking justice. This is more than just the justice, right? It is the district judges and the circuit court judges also. Court of Appeals. Why might they not make it through? What are senators? Start there. How do they get their job? Who said that over here first? By the people. They get elected by the people. So they have to worry about getting reelected. Which means if you put some jerk in there that everybody hates, Republicans and Democrats alike, the senators have to worry about getting reelected. So if they vote in favor of somebody who is absolutely hated by the rest of the country, like saying that, Westboro Baptist Church, that was the example I gave yesterday with free speech and opinion of the court, that everybody has to become a member of the Westboro Baptist Church. They're allowed spokesman for it. Nobody's going to want that to really go through. So in that case, if the senators are just going to vote for him blindly, they're probably not going to get reelected. So it does matter. Now, the Chief Justice, they're the ones who hold the control of the Rule of 4 meetings, the discussions on what cases they hear. But beyond that, they don't really have much more. Now, you had asked, Brennan asked, what does it matter if you're supposed to be impartial? And you are. I mean, they're not going to be influenced by politics. Very seldom are they influenced by politics. Just because they have conservative beliefs or liberal beliefs, that doesn't change their rulings on cases. It changes their interpretation of the Constitution. And there's a big difference. They will often, though, be members of that party. You know, you look at Scalia. He was appointed back in the 80s. He was a Republican. But that doesn't mean that politically, when he votes in November, that he's going to have that carry over into decisions. There's a huge difference in that and then how you rule in a case. So you can't just assume that because somebody is a liberal that they are automatically going to say that gay marriage bans are unconstitutional. Or because you're a conservative that business regulations are unconstitutional. Your interpretation of the Constitution has a much bigger impact on how you rule on a case. Now, as we look at what they do, these are the cases or the types of cases that you can be exposed to. So federal questions, diversity cases, those are kind of the two breakdowns. And federal question cases come from what should we have regarding whether it's constitutional or not. So that would be the Fourth Amendment, no unlawful searches and seizures, Matt versus Ohio, exclusionary rule. That would be a federal question. Was that appropriate? So how about McCulloch versus Maryland? Was that a federal question case or a diversity case? Federal question. Where does the supremacy clause fit? Where does the necessary and proper clause fit? Right there. So federal question. Diversity case, that is when you sue somebody else. It's individuals, in other words. It's not really looking at the Constitution and whether something you're doing is constitutional. It is looking at citizens and it's person-to-person issue. It's not person-to-government. When it becomes person-to-government, that is a federal question. That becomes a federal question. Now, the writ of certiorari. In order for a writ of certiorari to be issued, Fred, how many justices need to agree to that?
4.
Thanks, Fred. 4 for Fred. 4 for Fred. Got it. 4. So the rule of 4, you order it up from the lower court. And why this matters, I really want you to get this. They don't get to just decide this is a case we want to hear. There has to be an original case in the first place. Without an original case, they're not going to be able to hear it. And those original cases all start here. They work their way up. So think back to that graphic we had where it was district court to circuit court to state or to Supreme Court. On the state side, the dual court system, you have a state side also. You have local, intermediate appeals, state supreme, and then U.S. Supreme. This is it. This is the jurisdiction. Now the blue are cases that would start the Supreme Court. I mean, you look at those. When do those ever happen?
It's kind of hard to see on.
Those are very, very rare. So 2 or more states. If we were to sue Wisconsin or Ohio, we're going to sue Ohio for the Toledo Strip. We're going to sue Ohio. We're not going to try it in Michigan. We're not going to try it in our circuit. That would go to the Supreme Court. That is the original jurisdiction, and that is extremely rare. Another issue could be foreign ambassadors that are sued or something related to that in the United States, and not from a UN getting involved standpoint, but more of something they did where it could go there. How about President Nixon? U.S. versus Nixon. Clinton versus New York. In those cases, they just started right at the Supreme Court. So those cases would also go up there. But most of the time, it's going to be this. These are the cases that would eventually work their way up through appeals. Yeah.
How do they just start from wait to the Supreme Court? How does that happen?
The Attorney General, a Solicitor General would get involved, and it's usually like, okay, so there were a few years, it would have been 2 years ago, Boehner was nonstop saying they were going to sue Obama for, I can't remember exactly what it was. He issued some executive order, and they said that they were going to sue him. Well, that would mean that it would go to the Supreme Court, and they would decide, did he violate the Constitution by issuing that executive order? So the travel bans are not there. I think the travel ban right now is right here, the executive order, but they're issuing another one, so it doesn't really matter. But that was not from a member of Congress. That was from a locality suing and saying that they shouldn't have to follow it. So a little bit of a difference. Most of them, though, are going to be appellate cases that get there.
So the only way it can start directly in the Supreme Court is if it's
These are the only times it can start directly there. If the U.S. if the U.S. wanted to sue Michigan, or how about Texas? Noah was talking about gay marriage. If they wanted to sue Texas for something, or Texas wanted to sue the U.S., whatever, that could go right there. If foreign ambassadors or other diplomats, they get sued while they're in the United States or something like that. A state and a citizen, if, let's say, California sues you for something, I don't know what that would be, then it would go there. But otherwise, the only time they can hear a case is through appellate jurisdiction. Now, just quickly how we get their ruling. We have the beginnings. The beginnings of the case, oral arguments. It's an hour aside. So this lawyer presents their case and says, look, the circuit court got it wrong. This is my constitution. This is my interpretation, and this is why they were wrong. Here's the clause. This is what you have to pay attention to. Then the other side would say, no, they got it right. The Fifth Amendment allows this to happen. That was not what the intent was when they wrote the Constitution. They are taking it too far. The ruling was correct. You need to uphold the ruling. All well and good. Then there are the briefs. Now, who gets to submit briefs? The plaintiff and the defense. And who helps them often with their briefs? Lawyers and interest groups. Interest groups. If there is a gun control case, who 100% is going to submit a brief saying why the Second Amendment should protect somebody's right to own a gun? The NRA. 100%, they will say why in that situation they are guaranteed the right to bear arms. And that's what they do. It's not like they just say, hey, please vote this way. That's not what they do. They say, hey, please vote this way because here's the Second Amendment. I'm going to reference 50 other cases that show you why in this situation the Second Amendment is applied appropriately and they deserve to own their weapons. So it is an explanation, legal explanation of how that works. Then, if they submit their briefs, they go on to a conference where they talk and they confess all their sides, and then they say, all right, I am leaning this way, and we get 5 people over here. We get 4 people over here, and they say, go write your opinions. They use their legal language, and they say, the Second Amendment did not mean that you get to have a cannon and roll it through the hallways of a school. That is not bearing arms. This side says, yeah, of course you get to bear arms. That's a cannon. You get to roll that through school. That just sounds silly. You can't take that right away. Then they write their opinion. They come back and they vote on the opinions then. So original ideas don't matter. We have 8 now who say, yes, you get to use your cannon. 1 who says, no, you can't bring that to school. Then that's the outcome. So that is how they get to their decision. That is how they get to their opinion. And now we have a precedent that is set, and everywhere in the country gets to take cannons to school. Noah.
You can't have a tank in most states, though.
What?
You can't have a tank in most schools.
That's not fair.
As long as you modify the treads so they don't tear up the roads.
Good to know.
The cannon can be operational.
Okay. Thanks. Concurring or dissenting opinions, important piece for us, the different types. If you dissent, that means you're on the losing side. So if there's an 8-1 decision and you're the one, you have to write the dissenting opinion, saying why, according to your interpretation, you disagree with the outcome. That right there is the dissenting opinion. Now, the concurring opinion is a little different because you're on the winning side, but you might not have agreed with why you're on the winning side. So in other words, it's an 8-1 decision. And 7 of those 8 said it is your Second Amendment right to roll a cannon through school. And 1 person says, yeah, I agree it's your right, but I think it's your right of freedom of expression. I think that's a First Amendment issue, not a Second Amendment issue. You're still ruling in the same direction, but for a completely different reason. So, yeah, you're on the winning side, but it's a concurring opinion because it's not the same. And if you're on the winning side and you're one of the 7, you don't write a concurring opinion, you don't write a dissent, you write the majority opinion, where you explain why legally, according to the Constitution, you decided that way, and you were the winners then. These ones, stare decisis, what does that sound like they are doing with stare decisis? Sounds like ISIS. Not the word. I mean, when they decide to let the previous decision stand. That's what stare decisis means. It means let it stand. What are they essentially doing? They're not going to change it. They're going to say, well, yeah, fine, hands off. We're not going to ruin or change what everybody else in the country said. We're just going to keep it as is. We're not going to do anything else. So it is a way for them to not really address the issue, to kind of just say, we're going to just let it go. We're going to let it go, not really address it, and leave it up to others. Okay, now speaking of others, Brown versus Board of Education. We're going to enforce it in the 1950s. And how long did that take? Into the 70s. All delivered speed did not work. So who do courts have to rely on? The executive. Because how strong are they? They are weak. They're the weakest branch. They have to rely on others to be able to do anything. And if they don't trust it, they don't respect it, nothing's going to change. What? The judicial is the weakest branch. Judicial is the weakest branch. Oh, no, the executive is required to help them. That's what I was saying. Okay. Constraints. Things that I've brought up to you. First, they have to pick up a side. They have to pick a side. They have to rule in a way that they can pick a side, and they don't get to just say, oh, yeah, this is a perfect case for us. We're going to start this case, and we're going to make a ruling on that law. They don't get to come up with what they decide. They have to have an issue that is presented to them. So in other words, they don't get to go seek people out. So think to those examples that we did with the free response. For 2 of them, why they didn't get their points is because they said that the Supreme Court gets to go and try people for violating the Constitution. They don't get to go out and seek people. Things need to be brought to them. So they're pretty limited. They only get to do stuff if it's brought to their attention. They also don't get to talk about hypotheticals. It has to be an actual situation. So in other words, the Great Lakes, that was our Michigan to Wisconsin issue with water. That was our example. Nothing's really happening right now between the water and Lake Michigan, between Wisconsin and Michigan. So, and what I'm saying is they don't get to then just say, okay, if Wisconsin were to start draining the lake, is Michigan going to be compensated? They don't get to rule on a hypothetical. It has to be something that has happened, which kind of holds them back also. And then lastly, political question. What that's really talking about is if there's no law that says you can't, this would have been years ago, but you cannot get married, a homosexual couple cannot get married. If there was no law on that, how are they to then decide whether that's constitutional or not when a homosexual couple can't get married? Do you get what I'm saying? There's no law that prevented them from getting married years ago. So then why would they not be able to get married? How are they able to rule then that what happened was unconstitutional when there was no law restricting it in the first place? So what they would say is, we're going to leave it up to Congress. And if Congress wants to pass a law that says it's illegal, then fine, or legal, fine. But we don't have anything to address. We don't have an issue to rule on because there's no law in the first place. So something has to be wrong in order for that to occur. Okay, we're getting towards the end here. We have what they get to do and what limits them. And this is really the how do you rule question that Brendan kind of presented. Judicial activism or judicial restraint. Now, they have power based on the fact that they're respected. Okay, they get to overturn things, judicial review. but they have to be respected. And that's where judicial activism, judicial restraint comes in, and their interpretation of the Constitution. So judicial activism. In that situation, that belief is that the courts are to make sure that people are not wronged by decisions of the legislator. So people's rights are not trampled by decisions of the legislator. So they seek this when Congress is not listening to them. So when has that happened throughout the year that we've talked about? What period of time did somebody skip the legislative body and go right to the courts because they could not get what they wanted accomplished? What group of people skipped Congress and went to the courts instead? The NAACP. They focused on activist courts, looking at rights, the injustices that were occurring. That is the best example by far for judicial activism. Judicial restraint, on the other hand, means that they pass laws. And when I'm saying they, I mean Congress. They are the ones who pass laws. It is not a judge's job to decide whether a law is a good law. It is their job to decide whether it is following the Constitution. So in other words, a judge's role is not to do justice. A justice's role is to look at the constitutionality of the law. There's a big difference. Restraint, it is not your input on whether that is fair. It is your input to say that follows the Constitution or not. Activism, change it. Change it. And then where we start to see the divide between interpretations of the Constitution is right here. Original intent. You need to interpret the Constitution based on what the people who wrote the Constitution wanted. So, what did the people of the Constitution want when they talked about the Second Amendment? The right to bear arms. Who had the right to bear arms? The people, everybody. So the idea is you have a document to govern the country. You don't get to change it based on your interpretation of the times. The times were back then, and there are strict meanings for what they meant when they talked about free speech, freedom of religion. There were strict meanings, things in their head that they had in mind. So those are what you should rule on. That is strict constructionist. It is clear what they meant. You don't get to interpret it, and every time it should be the exact same. Loose constructionist. It changes. Your interpretation of the time matters because regulating commerce, they did not have telephones in the 1700s. They did not have the internet. So how does Congress have the ability to have laws about the internet? But that means that you are interpreting and expanding it to today's situation. That is a loose constructionist view. So a big, big difference. And finally, the checks here, the checks on the Supreme Court, all from two other branches. So the president, what do they get to do to the Supreme Court? Number one, and really the only thing, appoint. Congress has a few more. First, they have to confirm them. Girls, they have to confirm them.
What do you mean?
They have to. The Senate has to vote for them.
Oh, yeah.
They have to vote for them. They also get to alter the structure, the number of justices. We have 9 Supreme Court justices. If they wanted to add 5, Congress could pass that law. FDR tried to do that during the New Deal when some of his programs got shut down. It didn't work, but they tried it. They can impeach judges, and then last thing they can do is amend the Constitution. If they amend the Constitution, can the Supreme Court declare that unconstitutional? No. It's a part of the Constitution then. So that is another check on the Supreme Court. Yes, Noah.
I've never really gotten the whole unless you're